Knowing each other personally and socially for the past 10 years, Kim and John have joined forces, bringing years of experience and training, providing a platform for growth and personal development, along with a little humor. John is the heart, Kim is the mind, and together they are HeartMind-ify. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first podcast right here on HeartMind-ify. I'm John Izzy, and I am with Kim Cordy. Hey, Kim, how are you?
Hi, John. I am fantastic. I'm so excited. We've been talking about this for, it seems, forever, which can't really be true because we've only known each other since 2010. But it has been several years that we've talked about doing this.
Absolutely. And we had a test run in April where we were doing live shows on Instagram Live, and that was really good. We got a lot of followers from that, and we thought we'd start a podcast instead so that the time difference, I'm on the East Coast, Kim's on the West Coast. So trying to find that time when we're both awake and fresh is really hard. So this way we can put the podcast up at a time of our choosing, and then everyone can listen to it at their leisure. So this is a great start for us.
Exactly. Very exciting.
So let's go ahead.
I was just going to say, so we came up with HeartMind-ify, and I think it's a good idea to explain what exactly we mean by HeartMind-ify. If you were to meet John and I, which is what you're doing today, you would see that John is so heart-driven, and I am very logic-driven. It's all about like my mind and thoughts and thinking. And it's just so funny. Here we are together coming from different perspectives. But what's funnier is that people would normally think that a female is going to be the heart and the male would be the mind. But we've kind of reversed roles, but it really works for us. And it's worked for a lot of years for us too.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And we first met back in 2010 when I was working for a real estate investment trust company in the Washington, D.C. area. And Kim came to the company to help us with an implementation of a software package that we were installing at the time. Kim and I both have a very technical background, so that's how we met. But the exciting thing is that we clicked like I never clicked with any other consultant that I had worked with. There was something about your familiarity. There was something about the way that you approached topics, and it was very, very from the mind, but it was also very heartfelt. And I, on the other hand, come to this with a very heart-centric focus, but yet because of the technology background and the schooling that I've gone through, I had to learn to allow the mind to take over. So I think our approach to life is a great perspective for us and for our listeners.
Yeah, our connection was really strong. In fact, I've had this consulting business since 2006, and you were the only person that I thought of when I was overwhelmed with work and needing help to bring in. Because I knew you, I trusted you, and we worked so well together. And here we are now doing something completely different, but still working quite well together.
Absolutely. And coming from unusual roles for a male and a female, usually the male, in the typical societal understanding of male, the male comes from the mind and the female comes from the heart. But we're kind of switching things up because we are two different people that way. I am very heart-centric and you are very mind-focused. So I think the two perspectives are going to be interesting. The guys don't really talk from the heart. Guys usually, are very logical and very analytical. And, to have a perspective from the heart, from a male's point of view, is going to be refreshing, I think, for a lot of listeners.
Well, my husband always says I'm a girl, but I think like a guy. And so that that balance is just like you're saying for you is applicable to me too. So I think this is going to be fun. And I hope that what we present and what we have to say resonates with our listeners. So it's going to be interesting. But, John, really, before we can go into all of the different subjects and topics that we want to talk about, the purpose of this first episode is to get to know you and I, to understand where we're coming from, see if users connect with one or both of us like we connected to each other. So why don't you start out and tell me, or tell our listeners, I already know your story, but tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this point of us starting this podcast.
Sounds good. We don't have enough time in the day to tell the listeners who I am, but I'll do my best to condense it to a couple minutes. So like I said in the beginning, my name's John Izzy, and I was born in the state of Pennsylvania. The Italians lived on one hill, the Irish lived on one hill, the Germans lived on another hill. And so it was very different than it is today. We're more meshed, and ethnicity doesn't really have the impact that it had, back in 1964 when I was born. So I come from an Italian background. So there was a lot of yelling, a lot of laughter, a lot of crying, a lot of emotion. Italians are really emotional. And I think that's where my approach to life started from, because I'm Italian and because we're emotional. It's, you speak from your heart. That's just what you do. So we finally moved to Washington, D.C., or moved to Maryland, which was about 20 miles from Washington, D.C. And then that's where I grew up as a child, and, went to school and had my friends and the sports that I did and all that kind of stuff. I come from a family of three. I have an older brother who currently lives in North Carolina and a younger sister who lives here in West Virginia with me. So, there's a lot of history in my life that I've always thought about as, how can I better myself in this world and do what I feel is important to me. And even back in my teens, I always thought that way. I never thought about, going to school and becoming a lawyer, or going to school and becoming a doctor, or going to school and having a great career. I always thought about going to school to learn how to help other people. And that's me in a nutshell. That's where my life took me. And excuse me, it took me to the Capuchin Franciscans, which is a religious community within the Catholic Church, because we're Italian. We're also very Catholic, and in every Catholic family, there's a priest. A priest. You have a priest in your family. So I fit that role for them and for myself too. And I joined the Capuchin Franciscans, and, I lived a life with them for 9 years, at times very rigid. So there was a lot of meditation and prayer. So I learned a lot of that. And, and then the focus was on studies, but the focus was on working with the community. So it was working with the poor. It was working with, in an AIDS hospice. It was working with teenage prostitution. I worked in a mental health facility. So I saw myself, devoting my time to health related issues, and that propelled me to do what I'm doing today. But I don't want to get too far ahead yet. I do want to talk about my time when I left the order, because I left the Franciscans at a time in my life where I realized that there was nothing with the Franciscans that I could do that I couldn't do not being a Franciscan. So then the question I had to answer myself was, well, then why am I with the Capuchins? Why am I with the Franciscans? And so I couldn't resolve that issue. And so then I left. And when I left, I ended up in Montana, which is where everybody goes when they need to have a sabbatical from life. So I go to Montana, and I needed to start a whole new life. So I started working, and I worked at the Missoulian, which was a newspaper. I think it's still the main paper in Montana, or in Missoula. In any event, I was working at the Missoulian, and my office overlooked a bridge that connected the two parts of the city. And I noticed one day that there was, a gentleman on the bridge. He was actually a young kid on the bridge, and he was standing on the edge of the bridge. And immediately I went into service mode, and it's just something that I do. And I walked outside, walked up to the bridge, and had this great conversation with this young kid that was just struggling with life. And so at the end of the conversation, we were talking, and towards the end of the conversation, the police showed up, the firemen showed up, a priest showed up from the local parish there. And at that point, I gave him an ultimatum, and I said, look, you have a choice to make today. You can either jump and, complete the task that you started, or you can walk away from the side of the bridge and give me a hug. And he chose to walk away from the side of the bridge and give me a hug. And it was at that point that I think it solidified for me that living my life from the heart is what's so important for me, because it made a big difference in this kid's life, and it obviously made a impact on my life as well. So, it was there where I moved, and I left Montana a couple months after that situation and moved back with my family, and then began my career here. And, that's where Kim and I met at the real estate company. And, it wasn't fulfilling for me. It was like I kept thinking about the young boy that was on the bridge, and I kept thinking of all the work that I had done when I was with the Franciscans, and life was just not fulfilling enough for me. And so I decided to move to West Virginia, where I found an organization called Bikers Against Child Abuse. And I joined their organization. And now, currently, I am working with sexually abused and physically abused children and empowering them to not be afraid in the world in which they live. Again, coming from my heart, it's a service oriented work that I'm doing. And I decided also too that how can I reach other people? So I decided to begin a coaching career after getting certified. And now I see clients as well during the day. So, I think my whole life in a nutshell just is a walk on the heart. It's a movement forward. And that's where that's where my approach is. And that's why I'm the heart in this HeartMind-ify world that Kim and I are creating. So Kim, that's a little bit about me. And I think, as the time goes on, people will understand me and hear more about me and my perspective. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Happily, but first I just want to say that when you say you come from the heart, it's obvious to anybody who meets you. It just exudes from you. When they say everybody loves Raymond, that TV show, well, everybody loves John. It's just true. So I just want to emphasize to people as you listen to the podcast, and I know that all of John's friends, clients will testify, you really get how much John comes from his heart. Well, now a little bit about me. I was born in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was independent, and from the day I was born, and I can still remember, this little child that even then I wanted to get things done. My mom told me the story because my teacher told it to her. I was probably in the first or second grade. I went up to my teacher very indignantly and said, somebody wrote F-U-C-K as I pointed to the wall and said, we have to get rid of that because that is wrong. Those words should not be up there. And she tried so hard not to laugh at this small child being so indignant and trying to get this cleaned up and take care of business, and just laughed heartily when she told my mom the story. But it's kind of who I am. My sister says I have this part of my personality that's corporate Kim. Give me a problem and I'll figure out a way to fix it, which is why I was so successful as a consultant. I could go into a client and they tell me like, this is how we currently process. So I became very good at implementing a procure to pay system. So they would tell us their current state, or me, their current state process. And I immediately could see how to fix it and how to take it and make this process easier and consolidate here and look at changing this process. And would this make it better? Because that's how my mind works. And an example of this was early in my career, back when Lotus 123 was a system everybody used. Who would use Microsoft, right? Lotus was the king then. We had a problem within the organization being able to determine recoverable income. And it's in real estate, which is both John and I's vertical that we were in. We were I was in accounting. And at the time, the property managers would report to us the P&Ls, and I'd have to do the analysis. Well, part of what we needed to get was a better breakdown and a better understanding of where we stood as far as recoverable income, because your office buildings, every tenant pays a percentage, and every lease is written a little differently, and you don't know where your revenues are going to end up. So as a public company, it was really important to know that. I developed a system to not only define and calculate every lease and every building that we owned, but also was used to define whether it was monies owed from last year or from this year. And I went all over the country. It served to help me, yes. But when I went over the country to train all of these different property management companies, it benefited the organization. And fast forward to I'll say 2005, I was devastated by a divorce, literally laying on the floor. And so I thought to myself, I can't do this. I can't go through another divorce again. I can't control someone else. I can only control me. So what can I control? I can control whom I choose to get in a relationship with. And I need a better vetting process. So I came up with what I call the perfect heart. It's a Venn diagram. You've got intersecting circles at the top, and one side is you, one side is your partner, and the intersecting part is your time together. Then you attach a little V at the bottom so that now that shape looks like a heart, and that represents friends and family. Because I knew that not spending enough time with my spouse or partner, doesn't matter, or spending too much time with them wasn't healthy. And I needed to find a way to balance it. And that was a tool that I used. So I would be at clients and share that with people, and they go, oh, this is great. I remember one woman saying to me, oh my gosh, when I write it out, my husband and I barely interact. She goes, we are headed for a divorce, and I think this is why. I was like, wow, that's impactful. I felt so proud of myself. And then later, my friend said, write a book. This is good stuff. So I did. But that was kind of the whetting of my appetite to figure out something better, something that could help people, because I knew that thoughts were part of it. And then my discovery led to understanding the impact of our brain, how our thoughts impact our emotions and emotions impact our thoughts. And this whole circle that I put into a package called the Emotion Chef. I'm not going to go into it now because it's like, just like you talking about your life, I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, which I do in my class. And that is how I'm of service. So I'm coming from a mind perspective for sure, but I am still heartfelt in it because I want to help people, but it's just coming at it from that little bit of a different perspective than you. And also too, you are very much one-on-one with people. I want to teach the masses. I want to teach individuals, help organizations. I want to speak to large groups. That's just how I approach things.
Thank you, Kim, for sharing that story. And it's so true. From working with you and knowing you, you definitely have this ability to take complicated concepts and make them easy to understand and relatable. And I love that about you. Isn't it great when we understand what drives us?
It sure is. It's so empowering, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think that's the beauty of you and I working together. But it's not just working together. We talk to each other every day, offering a different perspective to approach different issues in life.
Yes. Yes. For ourselves and our clients.
Absolutely. And, sometimes you need the mind to drive your decisions. And at other times, you need to rely on your heart and understand your feelings and what drives them.
Yeah, a little known fact is that the heart has a cluster of neurons that they call the heart brain and is constantly communicating with our brain. And that's where our mind sits. So is housed, I guess you could say. So it is a very close relationship with the heart and mind, just like there's a close relationship with you and I.
Absolutely. And that's why I think our show will offer a unique approach that will be relatable to our listeners. We've received feedback from our Instagram live shows, and I think recording a podcast is a good way to get our message out to whoever needs to hear it. And speaking of shows, what kind of formats are we recording?
Well, there's going to be two types. And the first show type is going to be just approximately 30 minutes where one week you have a subject that's more heart related and I'll have a subject that's a little bit more mind related the following week. And I'll bring up the subject or you'll bring up the subject and then we'll follow it up by a discussion so that it's covering both ends of the spectrum and one of us drives it each week. And then you want to talk about our second show type?
Absolutely. So I'm really excited about this second format, which is titled Our Guest is You. This show will probably be a little bit longer because our guest will be listeners like all of you, and you will share the mic with us. We will invite, professionals, nurses, mothers, fathers, maybe teachers, and other coaches. It's basically going to be the topics that you and I discuss, Kim, and how those topics relate to our guests in their professions and in their daily life, and the impact it has on the heart and the mind. I think it's going to be exciting, and I'm really looking forward to both types of shows. So what is our next show going to be about?
It's going to be carrying on a little bit more about my story because I don't think my story is unusual. It's not the fall. It's how you get up. And I've talked many times in various formats about how I literally laid on the floor in my condo and how important it is to get up and to get up faster and things that we can do to be more resilient.
Well, I can tell you, I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about this topic and the importance of not only getting up, but how fast we get up. And then the exciting part is our discussion afterwards. And then the comments from our listeners, which I think is going to be really important. It's going to give our listeners a chance to participate in our shows by going to our podcast page and leaving their comments. Look, the bottom line is you and I can talk all day long, but to have our listeners participate in our discussions, I think that'll be beneficial for us all.
I do too. We both think we have great ideas, but there's still a lot more ideas out there, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? That's all I really have to say today. Do you have any last minute thoughts that you want to talk about?
No, none. Just thank you for listening to our very first show. And John, we did it. We got our first one in the can.
We absolutely did. Have a great week, everyone. Kim, you have a good week, and we'll talk to you all soon. New shows are available every Saturday right here on HeartMind-ify.podbean.com or download the Podbean app. Kim and I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing us to be a small part of your life. Be kind to yourself and remember, our hearts tell the story, but our mind is the conductor.